So today we're going to be talking about my top 10 fantasy players rankings for default points leagues this season. So allow me to preface my list by saying this. I am a very cautious fantasy player with my first round pick. To me, it's not so important that if you have the fourth pick in your draft, for example, that they finish as exactly the fourth best player in total points, but more so that they don't finish outside the top 10 at the end of the year in total points. Because I feel like if you screw up your first pick by selecting an injury risk player or someone who has a down year or something like that, if you choose them as your first choice, you've almost guaranteed a lost season. So that's why I've ranked them in terms of who I think will score the most total points in fantasy, not the highest average per game. It's also incredibly easy to get caught up in the big name superstars of the league if you're new to fantasy. Yes, obviously they're going to be good contributors, but you shouldn't pick someone like LeBron top 5 just because he's LeBron, if you know what I mean. So these are 3 things to keep in mind throughout this list. You have to get good production from them, you have to walk the fine line between consistency and sporadic scoring, and you have to remain objective to players that you may like a lot because they're on your favorite team. Also, please don't take this list too seriously. This is just my opinion, and it may be entirely wrong. We won't know until the end of the season. So if you agree or disagree, that's 100% okay. Just leave a comment with what you disagree with and why. No need to get upset about anything, my friends. We're all doing this for fun. So let's get started with some honorable mentions that you might be surprised didn't make my top 10 so I can elaborate as to why they didn't make it. So we're going to start off the honorable mentions with maybe the most surprising one, and it's going to be Kevin Durant. Full stop, I'm not drafting him with my first pick. Not a chance. Not a chance in hell. Like, they're going to save him for playoffs. Even if they don't, I'm not taking a guy that's coming off an Achilles injury. I know it was 2 seasons ago. He missed half of last season. He looked good at the end. He was healthy. But if you want to draft a guy that had an Achilles injury with your first pick, I think that's a bad recipe for your entire fantasy season. I wouldn't let him go further than the 15th pick if he is healthy, because if in an idealist world, that's a league-winning pick if he does end up being healthy for the whole season. So if you have like the 6th pick in like a 10-team snake draft, then it could be worth taking a risk on him if you're a riskier fantasy player. But as I mentioned, I'm a very cautious player, and I have a list of people that I'm not going to draft under like any circumstance essentially, because I feel like their average draft position is way too high for the return you're going to get, mostly because of injuries. So Kevin Durant, he's outside of my top 10. I do not feel comfortable taking him with my first pick. I just don't trust the injuries. I don't trust that he's going to play enough games. And I'm really just not want to bank my fantasy season off of his health. So that's why he's not there. Then we move on to Russell Westbrook and LeBron James, 2 Lakers. Russell Westbrook, I just feel like the Lakers are just too weird. Like, I don't know how that's going to work. Obviously, he's going to be a good fantasy player. Top 10, I'm not 100% sure, because now that he's playing with 2 absolute superstars with AD and LeBron, I'm not really sure how this is going to affect all their fantasy production. So it might end up working really well, but I don't really want to take the risk when I have guys that I'm more certain about. So Westbrook is outside of my top 10. And then LeBron, as much as I hate to say it, he is getting older. They're probably going to save him for playoffs a bit more. He has had injury problems last season, and he's really just not going full effort in the regular season now. So I definitely wouldn't recommend taking him with your first pick. And I think that's basically my rationale there. And then Bradley Beal, he could be interchangeable with some of the guys in my top 10, like maybe at the very end, but there's some weird trade shit going on with him, so I just decided to go with other options. And then players from last year who finished top 10, I don't have them in my top 10 this year. It's going to be Vucevic. I think he's still going to be good. There's more options on the Bulls. I think Vucevic is still going to put up really good numbers. I don't know if he's going to stay in the top 10, however, at the end of the season. He is a really consistent performer, but they just have a lot more options. Then we got Julius Randle. He's mainly here because he played the most minutes in the league, so he very well could end up top 10 again, but I just sort of trust the production of the guys that I have ahead of him a bit more, so that's why he's not outside of the top 10. Chris Paul, I mean, he's just kind of old. I don't trust it, especially not for a first pick. You can definitely get Chris Paul at a later pick if you really want him, so that's kind of my thought process there. And then Gobert, he's fringe top 10 production if you have the default settings, because blocks are worth a lot more. But he's less likely to have really big games and like go off for like a crazy point total than the guys above him to me. And he's also just boring to watch. I mean, that's not really a good justification here, but I just don't really value him as a first pick in points leagues. And I'd much rather pick more exciting players that are probably going to contribute in a just as consistent a fashion. So starting my list off at the number 10 spot, we have Jayson Tatum. Now, I know what some of you may be thinking. I just said avoid your favorite players. You got to remain impartial. But I think Jayson Tatum is legitimately going to finish as a top 10 fantasy option this year. He finished 11th last year, just outside of the top 10, and that's missing games due to like COVID or whatever. And if he hadn't missed those games, he easily would have finished in the top 10. Overall, I think he's going to have a very similar season this year. He always goes on really good stretches in real life and in fantasy. Last season, he played in 64 games. 5 of those he missed due to COVID, so he only missed like 3 games last year. And he put up 26 points per game, 7 rebounds, shot 45% from the field, 39% from 3, good from the free throw line. And the Celtics team hasn't really shifted that much. I mean, we added Schroeder and Al Horford, but none of those are really going to affect Tatum's production. I think it definitely helps to even have Horford because that gives him a little bit more spacing to operate in. And he has been working on his playmaking. I mean, he had 4 assists per game last year. And now that Kemba's gone, we are going to need some more ball creation. More like play creation, I mean. So yeah, I think Tatum's assist numbers, I'd expect those to take an increase, as well as just taking like a more focal leader. We have seen like improvements from Tatum in like most seasons that he's played in. I mean, obviously everybody knows about that famous sophomore slump, but so far he's really emerged as a great player for the Celtics. I think that's going to continue in the next season. I don't think he'll be an MVP candidate in real life or anything, but I think for top 10 fantasy production, I think he's a very safe bet because of the consistency of the games played, the numbers he puts up consistently in scoring and rebounding, as well as the chance that he's going to increase his assists per game. I think he's a really solid option, and I think he's going to finish as the 10th best player for fantasy points leagues this year. At the 9 spot, probably my most controversial placement is going to be Holy Mount Zion. I have Zion coming in at the number 9 spot this year because if we look at the Pelicans roster, I mean, they've got rid of Eric Bledsoe. If we look at the spacing around Zion now, we got Devontae Graham, Alexander Walker, Ingram, and Jonas Valanciunas. And I feel like that gives Zion a lot of room to operate. I'm expecting him to be up around 30 points per game this season. Crazy to say, but he did average 27 points per game last season. And the only reason I was a bit hesitant on him last year was the injury risks, but he made it through a whole season pretty much entirely healthy. He had a hand injury at the end, but that was just like a freak thumb injury. Can't really factor that into a player being injury prone because stuff like that just happens. It's not like a chronic condition or anything. But yeah, 27 points per game last year, 7 rebounds. And the field goal percentage is crazy, 61% from the field. The free throw shooting, obviously it does kind of hurt. He shot 70% from the line, but he's getting there about 9 times per game. And if he does that consistently, especially with the spacing around him in New Orleans, I am expecting him to be up around at the top 10. I do think he's going to be around 9th this year. He wasn't too far off of the top 10 last year. I believe he came around 16th. So if he hadn't missed those games, he probably would have been up in top 10 contention. So I think Zion is definitely someone to watch for. He is ranked a lot lower in a lot of lists. So that's why a lot of people might be hesitant because they see other rankings and they're like, oh, that's way too early to grab Zion. But I truly think he's going to finish as the 9th best player this year. I'm fairly confident that even if it's not 9th, there's no way he falls any lower than like the 13th best player. So I think just having a surefire thing like that in Zion because of his efficient scoring, his rebounding, and just overall great play. So Zion coming in at the number 9 spot on my list. So if you're new to the channel, coming in at number 8 is one of my favorite fantasy players. It's going to be Damonte Sabonis. Last year he finished as a 10th best fantasy player, and that's with missing 10 games. So that just kind of shows you the consistency and the peripheral stats that this man contributes. So if we look at his stats from last year, he put up 20 points per game, 12 rebounds, and 6.7 assists, all while shooting 53 from the field, 32 from 3, and 73% from the line. And the thing with Sabonis that is so nice is the rebounding. Like, if a player can consistently contribute 20 points per game, which Sabonis does, and then they also, like, majorly fill the stat category and, like, one other statistic, whether it be rebounding or assists, then that just makes them a really good fantasy player. And in Sabonis' case, he's filling it up really well in rebounds, and then the assist increase has been a really nice addition as well. So if you're adding Sabonis, you're getting a lot of contributions from 3 different statistical categories. So that means, like, even if he's having an off night shooting, I always say this, you want players that even if they're having an off night shooting, they can still contribute in other facets of the game, just so, like, even an off night isn't as bad as an off night for a player who only contributes in scoring. So yeah, Sabonis just a really solid contributing player all around. Just love his game. He doesn't miss a lot of games either. I believe he had the Rona as well last season, so he missed quite a few games for that. But yeah, just you know what you're going to get with him. He's a very reliable, durable player, and that's why he's in my top 10 because like I said, I like guys that are safe picks that I know I'm going to get contributions from, and I don't have to worry about them having some nagging injury problems. So yeah, Sabonis is coming in at the number 8 spot. He's a really great fantasy player. I think he's usually underrated by players just because he isn't like a big name superstar compared to like other guys in the league. But yeah, if you can get Sabonis at the number 8 spot, I think that's a great choice for you. Coming in at the number 7 spot, we have someone that has the potential to move all the way up to at least number 4 on this list, but it's going to be KarlAnthony Towns. And if we look at his last season, it's kind of a write-off because it's pretty well known. We don't really need to get into it. He had a lot of personal issues going on in his life off the court, stuff that would really mess with your head when you're trying to play basketball, and just there's stuff bigger than basketball going on with him. We all know what it is. He had a really rough year outside of basketball, and you can't really judge his performance last year that harshly. But if we look at it from the basketball side of things, he did put up 24 points per game, 11 rebounds, 4.5 assists, and we all know great shooting from 3, 39%, 48 from the field. And yeah, the thing with Towns, it's kind of similar to Sabonis, is that if you're going to score consistently and you can provide that solid rebounding rate, you're going to be a decent fantasy player. And when you add in the 3-point shooting that Towns has, as well as the better free throw shooting, he really is just a solid player. And again, the Pacers do have a lot more options than the Timberwolves do. Like on the Timberwolves, like Towns is the number one focal offensive point. Like there's no contest about that. Like everybody knows like they're trying to play through KarlAnthony Towns. And yeah, he's just getting a lot of shot attempts when he does play. He gets about 17 and a half a game. So yeah, if we're looking at it, I think he's going to be a really good contributor. I can see him going all the way up to the 4th spot on my list. The only problem is, like I said, there are health concerns with him. And I said to avoid health concerns, but I feel like in the case of KarlAnthony Towns, you really can't avoid taking him out of the top 10 because like for the first 4 seasons of his career, he didn't miss more than 5 games in his career. And it was just sort of these last 2 seasons that he did have some injuries, but like I said, can't really judge last season too harshly. So I think Towns, I trust him enough to remain healthy for the season that I'm comfortable drafting him at the 7th spot. If you aren't comfortable with him, then by all means go with Sabonis. But if I had him, I would definitely take Towns over Sabonis and anyone else I've mentioned so far. He has a lot of potential for fantasy to really pop off and have some really good nights for you. At number 6, we have one of everyone's favorite players. It's going to be Dame Lillard. Damian Lillard really just does it all for fantasy, man, other than the rebounding. We got 28.8 points per game, 7.5 assists. The thing with Dame is that he's just so consistent when he plays. He's a true warrior. He doesn't like letting his team down. He takes pride in playing every game that he can. And if we look at the seasons, he's never really had a season where he's missed like an insane amount of games. Most years he's played at least 75. And yeah, the Blazers offense completely runs around him. I mean, it'll be interesting to see how it works with Chauncey Billups, but I can't imagine he's not going to be the focal point getting a ton of shots a game. So yeah, with Dame, you're really getting it all. I mean, he's taking like 20 shots per game, main ball handler, setting up their whole offense, playing every game. You can't really ask for much more than that. He scores efficiently enough. His effective field goal percentage, 55% last year. So yeah, Damian Lillard, I just love him. I think everybody loves him. It'd be hard to find someone that doesn't like Dame Lillard. Loyal to Portland, maybe to a fault, but I guess we'll see how things turn out this year. I'm expecting like a pretty identical season to what he had last year, and he was a top 10 fantasy contributor, and I'm expecting that to continue on into this season. So yeah, that's why I have him coming in at the number 6 spot. At number 5 is someone else who we can't really base their performances off of last season because we all know there was a Houston situation and then he had like a hamstring injury for like the first time in his career. Like if we look at Harden throughout the years, he's played like almost every game most seasons. He's sort of like Dame, he likes to play every season, but Harden sort of does it more for like the individual accolades. He likes to go for those MVP trophies and stuff like that. But yeah, so James Harden's coming in at number 5. He has the potential to go all the way up to, honestly, around the number 2 spot. James Harden is absolutely ridiculous for fantasy. Every single year, it's just like he contributes triple doubles. Like it's the points, the rebounds, the assists, the free throw shooting. Players that get to the line a lot and can shoot there efficiently really contribute to your fantasy team because it's just sort of pretty much free points. Like you don't have to really worry about negatives of them missing. And yeah, Harden does that better than anyone in the league. And if we look at his role now with Brooklyn, he really is more of a playmaker. He's getting a lot of people involved. He's running the point for them. He averaged 10.8 assists per game last year, which is absolutely insane. It's really going to help out for fantasy. I think he has the potential to go as high as the number 2 option, but in light of like the players I have ahead of him, as well as the hamstring thing, I don't know what Brooklyn's plan is. I feel like they're going to be top of the conference by a significant margin, so I can see them maybe resting players on back-to-backs or whatever. But yeah, ignoring all of that, in my view, I have James Harden as the 5th best player for fantasy points leagues next year. I think he's going to have the 5th most total points. I can't really see him dipping any much lower than that, barring any injuries, but I can't really see that being a big issue unless it's some new development, which you can never really predict. So yeah, James Harden, number 5 spot. Let's get on to number 4. 4th on my list is going to be Steph Curry. Steph Curry was back to his MVP form last season, and that was with having literally no help. Like Steph Curry was getting triple teamed, double teamed. It didn't matter. He was still averaged 32 points a game, 5 rebounds, 5 assists. Obviously shot insane from the field, 48, 42, and 91%. And yeah, now that Klay's entering back into the lineup, the Warriors are starting to get some promising young rookies around him. Maybe Wiseman will be something. Kuminga looks solid in Summer League. They're going to have Wiggins. Hopefully he can help more if he's not like a secondary option. He's more like a third tertiary player behind Klay and Steph. But yeah, I think having Klay back is really going to help Steph Curry get more open looks, at least not as heavily contested, because we all know he has his off-ball movement, but now teams are going to have to focus on him and Klay running around. Obviously that's dependent on Klay being healthy, but even if Klay does miss a few games, Steph Curry should still put up numbers similar to what he had last year at the very least. And yeah, I just think he's a crazy player to have for fantasy. I mean, when he gets going, like we all remember he had that stretch last season where he was the best player in fantasy for like 3 weeks straight there. Nobody could stop him. He had a 62-point game. That's just the potential to do things like that combined with like the way Golden State's offense is literally revolving around him. all the looks he's getting, averaging 32 points. Like, it's just foolish, man. And I would think Steph Curry is someone that if you have the 4th pick, I think you absolutely have to take Steph Curry unless one of the guys above him has somehow fallen. But I think the top 3 for this year's draft is pretty solidified to most people. But I think Steph Curry is the 4th best player for fantasy points leagues this year. 3rd best player in fantasy next year, in my opinion, for points leagues is going to have to be Luka Doncic. We all know how the Mavs play. Everything's running through him. He's touching the ball every single possession. He's at least trying to create something. He's playing heavy minutes a game, at least 33 minutes per game last year, 34 minutes per game, excuse me. And then, it's the triple-double numbers. He was averaging 27, 8, and 8. And what more could you ask for fantasy, really? A triple-double threat every night that the entire offense is revolving around, who can shoot decent from 3. The free throw percentage does need some work. I will admit, I don't know why it's so low. He's a decent shooter, but his percentages don't really reflect that because he takes a lot of difficult threes and keeps him mucking his free throws. So I'm expecting him to finish as the 3rd best player. I don't think it's going to be that contentious of a statement to admit that. I mean, we all seen what he did last year. Last year he finished as the 3rd best player in fantasy. And yeah, I'm expecting that to hold up for this season. So if you have the 3rd pick in your draft, I think it's pretty solidified that you should take Luka, unless one of the guys above him is still there, of course. But just having an entire team revolve around you, getting all of these touches, playing these minutes, and he'd be higher on the list if he had some help. Like maybe if Porzingis actually starts playing well, then Luka can get a lot more easier opportunities to score the ball. But for now, the way the team's currently constructed, I would say Luka is going to be the 3rd best player in fantasy, and I'm pretty confident about this one. Number 2 spot, we have reigning NBA champion Giannis Antetokounmpo. Last season, he played 61 games, so he missed 11 games, and he still finished as the 4th best player for fantasy, which really just shows you the numbers he's putting up when he is playing. He's averaging 28 points per game, 11 rebounds, 6 assists, while shooting 56 from the field, and then the free throw percentage, similar to Luka, they both shoot around 70%. Not great, but getting to the line as often as Giannis does, it's still free points for the most part. He's getting to the line around 10 times per game, and I don't think I really need to say too much about him. I mean, 2-time MVP, 2-time Defensive Player of the Year. What more do you want from him? Just won Finals MVP. Really helps the Bucks. Again, the main central theme with these guys that are in the top 10 is that their whole team's going to circulate around them. They're the thing that makes their team run. They're sort of the engine of everything. And yeah, I couldn't apply more to Giannis. Absolute threat in transition. All of the dunks, very efficient scoring. Really helps you for fantasy. Plus, he adds defensive stats as well, which you can't say about a lot of the other guys that are in this top 10. So, Giannis, really good pick. If you have the 2nd pick in your draft, I think it's pretty unanimous who's going number 1. But if you have the number 2 pick, I'm taking Giannis. And if you really wanted to, you could take Luka, but I'm more comfortable sticking with Giannis. And yeah, we'll go ahead and get into who I think is going to be the best fantasy player this year for fantasy points. And then to finish it off, to absolutely no one's surprise, the best player in fantasy next year is going to be Nikola Jokic. I'm very confident about that. He played every game last season, won the MVP, averaged 26 points per game, 10.8 rebounds, 8.3 assists on great efficient shooting splits. I mean, the Nuggets don't have Murray next year either, so he's really just going to have even more opportunities to handle the ball, create opportunities for teammates. And the thing about being an engine that your team circulates around, it couldn't be more applicable to anyone but Nikola Jokic. Like, he is the Nuggets. Their whole identity just sort of revolves around him. And yeah, he was the best player in fantasy points leagues last year by almost 1,000 points. The closest to him was Russell Westbrook with 3,339. Nikola Jokic finished with 4,213. So yeah, I expect that to continue. He averaged 58.5 fantasy points per game. Nobody was even close to him on that either. It's just kind of ridiculous. He's pretty much broken from a fantasy perspective. If you have the number 1 pick in your draft and you don't take Nikola Jokic, I don't know what the hell you're doing, because he pretty much can win you your league by himself if he has a season like he had last year. As long as you do a somewhat decent job building the rest of your team, just having someone like Nikola Jokic can cover for a lot of mistakes, because he's not a very injury-prone player. He's not a high leaper or anything. He's not getting in a lot of situations for high-impact injuries. He's an on-the-floor type of player. Played every game, like I already mentioned. And I just can't see anyone that you'd want more for fantasy. I mean, he's getting the ball every single possession he's on. He's playing heavy minutes. He's the best player in the league for regular season, that is, from last year, as the MVP trophy would show. And yeah, I just don't think it's going to be that close. If you have the first pick and you don't take Jokic, you're really doing yourself an injustice. He's by far going to be the best fantasy player. And yeah, that's going to wrap up my rankings for this year. So like I said, let me know if you agree or disagree with anything in the comments. From the 8 to 10 spot, I can definitely hear some arguments, but from the 7 to 1, I'm pretty confident in where I'm putting these people. Again, there are the honorable mentions that I'm not comfortable taking. Like I said, I am very cautious with my first round pick because I feel it's very crucial that you do get it right and get someone that's going to perform and be healthy for long durations of the season. But But yeah, thank you guys very much for watching. Hope it helps you guys out with your drafts. And as always, I hope you guys all have a great rest of your day.